Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming on Power Talk, thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And as we continue to try to cultivate the live music experience after the plague, the pandemic, what is it going to look like? How restrictive will it be? Will we be able to liberate as patrons of the arts and heal through live music? It's important to talk to somebody who has figured out a way to sing for their supper, doing a lot of different things within the music industry, jingles, commercials, record dates. Most importantly, this cat, his intentions for getting into music were to inspire people to be themselves. When he performs within a group context, he's always listening. He has huge ears. He's able to hear the whole ensemble, and as a result, then just react to the sound around him and contribute to the overall texture of the music. And I think that at the end of the day, people like him, whether they know it or not, are going to be very responsible for helping younger cats coming out of this pandemic become more comfortable on the bandstand, become better leaders on the bandstand, show more love on the bandstand, and then actually access all the lineage of all the musics through their apparatus or their voice or however they express themselves. Guitarist John Penny, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
It's an honor to have you, man. I just wanted to, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I wanted to put this in for you. I don't expect you to know who it is, but listen to the content. We'll come back and break it down.
Sure.
Well, I was familiar with Coltrane before I actually got a chance to play with him because I've been listening to the record. So, he was already recognized as quite a force. But what Coltrane was able to do musically, I got the opportunity to sit in with him at a small club that the quartet was playing at in Chicago called McKee Fitzhugh because Elvin hadn't returned for the last set of the show, the evening. So I had been playing. The owner knew me, and I played. He knew that I played really pretty well, and I played the jam sessions on the couple of nights that they had them. And so the place was packed and late, and he wanted John to play. So he asked John to let me play with him. So Coltrane didn't say no. He just shook his head, and we went up and we played 3-4 numbers. And for me, it was just trying to keep my cool when I'm up on the stage playing with him. Fortunately, I could hold my own, and I'd been practicing with the records.
Right,
so
right.
Material. So, it was a trust. First of all, there was a trust thing. He didn't say, "Can this guy play?" He trusted. There was this trust. There was an air of, okay, we'll go up and we'll play. And McCoy and Jimmy, didn't look at me weird. And obviously, I was doing okay. I was, nobody looked at me funny. I was holding my own. But playing with Coltrane, I realized why Elvin played as intensely as he did, because Coltrane was like a magnet. He was like a train. You literally, whatever you could throw at him, he could soak it up like a sponge. He was a conscious, a continuous stream of creative consciousness. But he was like a sort of a preacher. It was almost like in church. It was like each set, you think, couldn't get any higher, and it would go higher, it would continuously evolving, going higher, higher, and higher. So for me, it was a real highlight of my life.
You want to take a guess at who that is?
No.
That was
No, the tone. He sounds familiar. I mean, I'm with him. I'm following him very, very closely, but I don't know the name.
my interview from 2012 with the great drummer Jack DeJohnette, and he was relatively unknown at this time in Chicago, and Elvin got arrested, and they needed a drummer, and so you heard the story, and John, I wanted you to talk about the when you were kind of unknown, just starting out, and the opportunity that you had to play with one of the masters of music, and how it was like a sanctified experience, how it was a spiritual experience. We've gotten so used to, in the live context today, sitting and staring and watching someone's facility. And Jack said it, I don't know if he said it there or later in the quote, but he said each set, the spirituality would get higher and higher, and you'd have like people falling out of their chairs, screaming, hollering. I mean, that's all I wanted. That's the kind of music I want to partake in, or at least the people playing in that spirit. And I wanted you to talk about when you were touched by that.
Oh, you mean by just the spirit of the opportunities to play with a master musician?
Something along the lines of DeJohnette and Coltrane.
Right. Right. Yeah, and this what was so cool about the people that I had got those opportunities to play with. Is I remember starting out as a teenager in Iowa, listening to I can't remember the call numbers of a radio station out of Rochester, New York, with a little transistor radio.
Oh my God!
Oh
my God!
Eric Gravatt and McCoy, and later getting to see McCoy and all these great players. But you start out listening to them, and then first of all, there's that incredible thrill if you get to actually play with somebody like that. But what happens when you play with them is then that's where the magic, that's where you get a sense of the real power and magic, the deep power that music brings to everybody, musicians and non-musicians alike.
All right, let's just focus on power and magic. And ultimately, when you first had the experience to play with somebody who, I mean, I just did an interview with Jim Keltner the other day, and he was talking about Al Jackson coming in and laying down the drums on Ain't No Sunshine, the Bill Withers tune. And, Keltner asked Booker T. Jones if he could come into the studio and watch Al Jackson, because he figured this icon was going to have his own drum kit and all that. And Booker said, sure, come on in. And he gets in there, and some, long-haired hippie dude comes in with like a Sparkle set rented from a studio in Los Angeles. And Al Jackson comes in, doesn't put one key, doesn't tune any drum, just plays this kit the way it is. And that was they think maybe in 2 or 3 takes they got the cut. And the point is that Keltner realized that day that it didn't even matter what kind of guitar, what kind of apparatus you were playing. The sound comes from you. And so I just wanted you to talk about the indelible experience early on in your career when you had a chance to play with somebody who was able to access their multidimensional self. Didn't matter what kind of instrument they played, the sound came from them.
Right. Yes, and I had a great experience like that actually. With and the thing, because I hear and I'm sympathetic to all instruments. I had a great experience of playing with 3 like that simultaneously. 3 great icons of music, in an unbelievable experience. They were first Chick Corea, Lenny White, and Stanley Clark. So I want to play. We were the rhythm section. I was teaching. I got the opportunity to teach the first ever jazz history class at the University of Iowa as an undergrad. There was no jazz history, so me and a grad student teamed up to teach that class. And one of the things that we did is that we brought some great musicians there, including, of course, the Chick Corea's band, and Herbie Hancock was another one that we brought to Hanshaw Auditorium at the University of Iowa. So somehow we wind up in this little room, and I think this is can't remember, it was after the concert. We were just all hanging out there, and thanking Chick and the band for being there, and somebody, I don't know, it was me or my associate in the class. We just said, "Hey, can we jam with you guys?" Chick was like, "Yes."
That's
awesome. And so that's when you start floating in the clouds. At that very point when that happens, and then actually went in there. I guess had an amp. My amp was nearby. My guitar. I mean, maybe I don't know if we planned to ask him if we could jam, but anyway, I had my gear was like, at a hand's reach, just right in reach, so brought my amp in there. And the thing that's one of the more memorable things is that and playing with those guys, they started to warm up, and I don't know if it was my good friend and great drummer Tim Pleasant that may have supplied the drum set for Lenny White. I can't remember, or if somehow he had his own full backstage and setup. I can't remember what it was, but I noticed when he started to warm up, when Chick started to warm up and Lenny White, those guys don't waste notes.
Wow.
Everything they did, just you could feel it in your chest. Like, I thought, what is this? They're not playing a song yet. Lenny was just getting a feel for the snare and so forth. But every tap, and I swear it wasn't just, or at least I don't think it was just the aura of being in a room with those guys. I think really they play at such a high level that when they warm up, it's for real. It's a real thing, and you can feel the little warm-ups. And same thing with Chick Corea, just the power. And he played a couple little riffs, and the power in that just sent me through the ceiling.
Oh, I love it. Now we're getting somewhere. This is Pleasant told me that his kit was at your house, and there was like some school kit there that was ragtag, and Lenny just made it just on fire.
Yeah, and it's clearly, as you were saying, it's clearly it's not. I mean, every great musician goes out and finds a great instrument, be it a violin, the piano, a drum set, or bass, or whatever. But it's really not the instrument that it comes from. These guys are spirit charged. They come in there with this total internal focus that they transfer into the instruments, and that happened, and that floored me. And then, of course, playing with them was truly incredible. Just some groove. I think Chick Corea started a groove of some sort, and we just obviously I think I let these guys take the lead. I didn't feel at that point where I'm going to throw something of mine in there. I just let these guys take the lead. Okay, where is this going? And they just had this incredible groove. And when that happens, it's very infectious. If you can play at all, if your fingers work at all, they will pull you into a place that's like, it's them personally, but the spirit that they project pulls you into the place where they're at, and you start feeling like you contribute stuff that's going to make sense to the groove that's getting going.
When you say the spirit that they project, does that come in the form of a feeling, in a form of shapes? Like, can you talk a little bit more about absorbing that spirit? Because that's what DeJohnette was talking about is, I mean, and I think also you weren't playing to a crowd, but I also feel like in a live setting, the audience can also dictate that spirit. I know for a fact I've gone to shows where sparsely populated, the band maybe at a low ebb, and I'm just so out of my mind that within 10 or 15 minutes, the band is in their spirit mind and they're on fire. So I just wanted you to talk about, especially with guys, like, obviously you probably were just floating on clouds, just playing with these, guys that you looked up to. But can you talk about that projection of spirit? How does that look? I mean, in at least for John Penny, like, does it come in the form of shapes? Does it come in the form of synesthesia? Break it down.
Well, they start playing, and I think the way I view this is that musicians at that level, and we all, I think, at a certain level of maturity, everybody seeks for that ancient energy that isn't really, doesn't start out as ours. Depends on what what you look at spiritually, how you the source of all things. And because I don't try to get into and dictate anybody's religious thought, but I just personally believe that we're not here alone. We don't command all power. As humans, we're just not. We do get divine vibes from elsewhere. And I think guys at that level just have that ability to tap into it. They've learned to tap into it. They've learned that that's how they play at a high level. And, they practice. Their chops are very meaningful. The fact that they have technique, but they've also learned that technique is just, that's part of the messenger. That's part of the message, but the the message isn't just created right at your axe, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, absolutely.
And so what they're doing, that feeling that I got in my chest, even with when they were warming up, just indicate their ability to me to have tapped into music at that level. And I listen to Prokofiev, Bartok, Ravel, among classical composers that are really have a powerful influence on me as a composer and as a person. But they do that same thing. That music is, what do you call it, when you compose something and create a score? They're not playing it live, but what they do, they've captured that. It's a capture of that spirit that comes through the music of Prokofiev and Bartok. And then musicians like Lenny White, Chick Corea, Stanley Clarke are able to do that like on the spot. That's the beauty. That's where my classical musician associates really respect the jazz musicians, in that the jazz musicians call upon that energy, like that's what they learn to do. They call upon that energy versus where Prokofiev cans it for you.
Sure.
And it's the same source of energy, but it's put together and scored so that a good orchestra then can convey it. But these guys, lifted me off the ground with that, with the ability to connect to something bigger than all of us. And I felt it, I responded to it, and they carried me up to a point where I'd never been. And at a certain point, they transcended past that.
My God, this was just a random jam session too. That's unbelievable. I mean,
it's like they carried me so far, and then they wanted to show us, as if they wanted to show me, okay, this is where it can go on from here. And they went there, and it's like, okay, and I'm still hanging in there musically, but I could tell they were starting to transcend to another dimension, kind of the level of that spiritual connect. But it was beautiful, and as you said, the memory of that, I will never forget that, and that's when I learned that, that's you play at that level enough to connect with cats like that, and then that all of those cats they all build that together. It gets bigger when people get together and commune like that, and all connect to that energy at the same time. That everybody comes out, bigger. And I'm sure, to me, Miles Davis and other great influences on me started. Everybody starts as a kid playing an instrument, and at a certain point, that instrument connect to a bigger, higher form of energy, and they learn to go there at will.
I want you to talk about like you said, you would never dictate to anybody, dogma related to your own personal belief, philosophy, and access to source. But can you talk about your spiritual inclinations, and would you say that you were connected to the divine musically before Return to Forever came to the college? Was there experiences before then, even though you may not have been sure about it, but you got that same kind of feeling? And just talk about your own perspective on faith.
Yes, I mean, faith in the like in the music room faith.
Yeah.
Thing that I was definitely aware of it, by that point, and had started to experience, and that was just part of my strivings, and I just sort of sat around I got my guitar finally, started on playing a cornet, but when I got into mid-teens and started the guitar, I actually started to listen to Coltrane. I would play it was at 33 and a half LPs. I think that's the speed. I would play Coltrane at 16, like the half speed, and so that's where
I love it.
Wore out,
oh
I wore
my
out
God,
these records.
dude! I love it.
And I remember, I broke a record one day, practicing 10 hours, just focusing on Coltrane. And McCoy as well, did some transcribing, wrote out, just note by note, McCoy Tyner solos, and wrote them out and worked a train. But by that time, this train is just, that just killed me. The depth of his, the places that his music had taken me. So I guess to get back to your point, yes, I was aware of that, the type of energy that drives what I think of as the real, authentic music, and the reason to get into music is to find that place that, that touches everybody, that every human out there in the audience understands that we are this one kind of thing. And everybody gets that joy, whether you're playing or whether you're in the audience. You get that joy because everybody feels that same, as you're saying, that source energy. So I felt that before, and my good friend and monster musician Tim Pleasant, we had a gig. This was actually before that time of that experience of getting to play with Chick Corea. Tim and I were with our band. I think it was an early iteration of the band called Solstice. Tim would get these grooves going, and guitar player, I like playing my lines and so forth, but in the band with Tim, you get really used to playing not just the guitar chinking along with the hi-hat and adding the rhythm, but
Freddie Green, but yeah.
We would lock into these complex rhythms, playing the funk grooves. And one night, I was just, as usual, locked into the groove. The bass player, Tim, and I locked into this groove where, you settle back and yes, that's it. And I noticed at one point, and this is like, however you see this, you can interpret this, Jake, however you want. I went to the ceiling and was watching myself and Tim play.
Yeah, dude, I'm telling you, you were on the astral plane. Go ahead.
I became part of an audience from up above us, and I was just watching us play this groove for a while. And I thought, wow, because Tim was one of these drummers that his great drummer with great chops, but his spirit goes toward making the ensemble sound great. He hears melodies, he hears bass lines, and he's tuned into making the band great. That's how he thinks. It's not, I'm going to flash my own chops and be the fancy drummer. He's making the band. He does whatever it takes to lift the band up, and he was doing that. We were locking in, and we just became this rhythm machine. And at that point, I swear, I lost my body.
You're not. I mean, you can join the club, the legions of spiritual musicians who, be it the infectious listening groove or fatigue, or just a spirit, the collective spirit, literally watching from above, watching themselves play from the side of the stage or from the ceiling. That to me is what it's all about. And I want to ask you just quickly. Tell me why. Because, I mean, it's all music to John Penny. The guy is immersed in every genre of music. But why would you compare a classical bag where the notes are on the paper and it's a formula trip every night compared to what we're just talking about, early iterations of Solstice, working with Chick, where everyone's just reacting in the moment to a groove? And I just don't see, not that classical music is powerful, and the compositions are powerful, but it's in some ways it's static. There's no room to leave the head of the tune and hit the ceiling. But you said that it's the same source, so I'm trying to square that.
The thing, and the thing about that is that's I don't experience that from every composer. I really love and just respect hundreds of composers of classical music. That's what I came up in. My household was my brother who started playing guitar before me and influenced me toward playing guitar, brought in he had the Chicago blues scene records, the R&B records.
Yeah.
My dad brought the jazz records, and my classical pianist sister brought all the Vivaldi and the Bartok piano pieces. So I got this.
Oh my God, dude!
My brother also brought flamenco. My brother brought the Anitas de Plata, great Spanish flamenco player. And then I listened to the folk music and rock, so my head was just exploding with all that music as a little kid. That these older siblings, I was the youngest, or I'm not the young, I was the number 5 of 6 kids. So there's this huge record collection that came before me, playing on the old Sylvania or whatever record player.
Right.
And I took in all this stuff and just loved it. And what I've found over the years is, there's a lot of great classical composers of the real classic, what I think of the real classic or earlier classics. And then there's people like Prokofiev. And I realized that when you listen to his symphonies, just go nuts over his violin concertos. But he captures those little spiritual bursts, and it's totally different. I love Beethoven, but Prokofiev is one of those ones that is so different. It is like a cat jamming in the room.
Really?
That same thing.
Wow, I'll have to check that out.
His stuff is just like, if you listen to Violin Concerto number 1, there are licks in that are just like, that just kill me. Just to preface this by going back to when I was 8 years old, I begged my parents for a violin. And my dad came home finally. He listened to me. He came home with the cornet and talked about how, there's Satchmo, Miles Davis, these great players, and so here's a trumpet for you. I don't know how he acquired it. This is one, my dad had a long history in all kinds of stuff, came through politics and so forth, but wound up being called as an African Methodist minister. And I think it was by that time he brought me this trumpet. And so, I was a brass student, and my undergrad degree, I was doing a dual tuba and trumpet master, and my undergraduate degree wound up being as a tuba player. But wow. I was playing guitar all that time, and I was studying violin players as much as I was studying any jazz players, because that really got me going. And I started, even then, hearing some of the early violin concertos by Prokofiev, Mendelssohn, a lot of British composers, the French Ravel and Debussy, the French, British, Italians, Respighi. I was listening to all of those, and so I was digging the violin licks and porting them over to my guitar. But I was at the same time I was a brass major in school, so I was doing all. And that back when I went to school, they kind of discouraged. There were no jazz studies in school, so they kind of discouraged my guitar. They said, you need to stick to your brass. And I said, yeah, whatever. And so I studied that. And, played the concert bands and, the University of Iowa marching band, and all that. But I really...
well, no, this is important. Is it fair to say, I think one of the things about, timing is everything. And, you talked about locking in with the hi-hat, kind of that Freddie Green. I mean, for a long time, the guitar was a rhythm accompanist instrument. The saxophone was the lead solo instrument. And then during John Penny's time, the guitar became a lead instrument, where now today it's like king, and I wanted to read this to you and then get your feedback. You can relate it to your own, methodology. This is from my interview with Alan Toussaint. He said, He said, even the tuning of the instrument has changed music. You need a meter to get things done, when before you used to read your heart. Some of the stuff that you found out in the tuning is what made you you. After a while, we begin to look at a needle. I'm not saying it would be good to play out of tune, but out of tune isn't always out of tune. Once you begin to operate on this very thin, straight line and, quote, now we're ready to go, end quote, you're ready to go because that meter dictated that you're ready to go. It is correct that it is totally in tune, but if you're not careful, your life of music can become that way. Can you talk about tuning to your heart? And because I just find that there was so much individualism amongst, I mean, I can hear it in your music. You have your own sound, and that was part of the magic of it. What you weren't predicating it on technology or inanimate objects to say that it was in tune. You were tuning it based on your soul. And I wanted you to talk about how you developed your own tuning.
And you're talking about soul tuning? Because I actually have developed and written a lot of songs in a vastly altered guitar tuning too.
I'm just, what I'm saying is when you were, I mean, when you first, you had the violin and you were a tuba major, but when you first really were working with the guitar, how you developed your own, because you didn't have technology, you didn't have a meter. I mean, you didn't have technology to help you tune it, and you tuned to your heart. And I wanted you to talk about that, like how you cultivated that, because that's what led to everybody's individual sound.
Right. And, I think I cultivated it, but unknowingly when you're younger, when I started playing around, at 14, 15 years old, and I actually, ported over to guitar as a full-time pursuit and just sort of, I kind of secondarily practiced my cornet, but it's it's something that you don't really, at that age, you don't really understand it, but you start because you're at that stage. I'm taking in Wes Montgomery at that point on one hand, and then Buddy Guy on the other hand, because I've gone back and you listen to Coltrane and his blue, he's got a blues bass, and you've heard Coltrane play the kind of blues, and then fantastic jazz kind of over, but kind of blues is sort of was kind of my starting point too. I think that Chicago blues sound.
Absolutely.
And so you're trying to, you're playing that, and you're at first trying to play like how did B.B. King play that? You bend the notes and you play around with that, but at first you're not connecting with that, and so it's you realize the first thing you realize as 15-year-olds, okay, I'm connecting with that. I'm bending notes. I'm playing the blue notes of the blues scale, but I'm not feeling that feeling. I'm not feeling that, that I'm not getting hit by the spirit yet by what I'm doing. I can hear it in B.B. King's, I can hear it in Miles, I can hear it in Train when you go to the jazz and so forth, but I'm not hitting that yet. So that at that young age, that, yeah, that's not right yet. That's frustrating because I'm actually playing the notes that they're playing. Same with Wes Montgomery. There's blues of the B.B. King, but then you start playing your Wes Montgomery licks. I had a really good ear. I passed out of music ear training class in college the first couple of days. They just gave me an A and said goodbye. They played me Bartok, they played me Beethoven, and I told them what all the notes were and all the scales and everything. So they said, yeah, you don't need this. Go study music history and your instrument and this other stuff. So I could pick out Wes Montgomery's notes, but I couldn't make it feel right.
Right.
And so I learned, okay, I thought that's what I'm missing. And what happens is it just took time, just played. And so while, by my late teens, I figured out not just what, I hadn't broken it down. Now they break it down in music schools as far as what it means to swing. But, no jazz studies for me, just listening, and then playing until finally, wow, that's what it is. That's what it means to swing. And you're not thinking about what it means. And the classical musicians would say, okay, well, yeah, play triplets, and said, no, jazz isn't. It's not triplets. It's the notes hit in other places, and that comes out of your bones, out of your heart, out of your, you just start to learn to feel that. Whatever level you're playing at, whatever high level of technique you're playing at, you learn to feel the difference between playing notes and having that, like I think what you're calling intonation, that where you start to tune into what the music really means. And it's
well,
it's
I mean,
that
ultimately,
thing comes.
you can. I mean, Joe Sample went to Wes Montgomery's house one day, and Wes was working on a tune, maybe a Caravan or something, and Joe's like, well, how did you play that chord? And Wes said, I have no idea. And he goes, well, how did you play that? He goes, I have no idea. He goes, you mean to tell me the notes you're playing you don't even know? He's like, exactly. And it was this street scholar approach. The Chicago Blues is another perfect example. I remember talking to Phil Upchurch, and he'd be walking down on Market Street with the blind dobro players. I mean, everybody had a unique sound. And I think with you, it was, everybody begs, borrows, and steals from their influences, but then you really get it when you kind of offer your own voice to the instrument. And, that's to me the magic of music. It's, you can play, going back to my interview with Keltner, he's talking about the late, great Roger Hawkins from Muscle Shoals, who did the song When a Man Loves the Woman. When a Man Loves a Woman with Percy Sledge. And, he said you can play the exact same beats that Roger played, but it's not going to sound the same. You can transcribe an Elvin Jones solo. It's not going to feel the same, or, it's this, there's only two letters that separate magic and music. And I know, that, and a lot of it was God given to you, but I also feel like that's why you've had a lot of longevity in music. It's why you spend hours up at night creating. I mean, it's intoxicating, man. It's truly, I just wonder if you feel like music has, not saved you, but has kept you young and kept you. Yeah, go ahead.
It may well have saved me. Though,
yeah, we'll talk about that. Talk
exactly
about that.
What that, because it's just, the focus, and I thought, well, the focus, well, that's crazy. You spend 10 hours a day practicing your Coltrane licks as a guitar player. That's what are you doing? I thought, well, it's dedication, but it's what kind of person would I have been if I didn't have this? I need this. And when you're starting out, and after you get through, learning, Wes Montgomery, and I was influenced a lot by John McLaughlin later on, and so forth, and you play these things, and then you start to become, you start to see this thing emerging, and at first it can be a little, you can be taken aback. So that's kind of weird. I'm starting to do this weird thing, and nobody does it. Wes Montgomery doesn't do that when he plays jazz. John McLaughlin doesn't do that when he plays fusion. What am I doing? And then you have to get your own confidence and say you have to let that go.
Right.
That's you. That's you emerging. You need to leave it alone and not worry about it. And I'll never forget something that Coltrane said about when he was really moving away from traditional music, and in the Love Supreme era, and I really love the Ascension album.
Sure.
The Ascension and those, and he said something about feeling really insecure about it. That this is really not what people are used to hearing. Should I be doing that? I mean, at some point he questioned himself, and I'm sure he very, because he was being guided by a spirit, I'm sure he quelled that self-doubt, fairly quickly, because he knew, he's just, when you're on that mission, it's not so much a logical mission.
Oh, you're in the snow,
totally. That's the way.
Oh, yeah.
You just know you have to play that way, even though you know that other people aren't playing that way, and some may say, "Wow, that's weird." But what happens is that when you connect to human beings, even when you start something new, they know it. You play something really new for an audience, and they know when you're connecting with them, even if it's something they haven't heard. So I would say to young musicians, feel free to be yourself. When you hear yourself starting to diverge from everybody else, and your body keeps doing it, just let your body take you there. Don't fight that, because that's you. That's you coming out, and it's weird at first. What is it? And I'm sure that's what Coltrane was reacting to, something like that. Well, should I be doing this stuff? And of course, the world now is saying, "Oh, God bless you, Train, for having just because that he's just."
Oh no, I mean literally.
Day,
I mean
amazing.
Eddie Henderson told me that. I mean, there, a lot of patrons of jazz were white, and you have white women standing up when he was in this modal psychic period, like, make him stop, and I mean, there wasn't just peer pressure, it was also totally non-commercial music, although it did get pressed on record because ABC Impulse was a tax write-off for, was a jazz tax write-off for, like, they'd have Paul Anka and these bigger acts, but, like, it did get pressed. But, I mean, the intestinal fortitude to pursue, like, the spirit is just profound. And he had people basically saying, screaming at him to make him stop. That being said, he wouldn't, because he knew, and he was also expressing, in my mind, going back to the field hollers and the diaspora, and how basically the Africa was raided, and the people came here against their will. It stretches all the way back to that time. And you're right. I mean, in retrospect, now we consider him, it's like folkloric, but there's no doubt that he went through, I guarantee you, it was not, it took him a while to quell that insecurity, and rightfully so, because it was completely off the grid, and it was wild. And, I mean, would you say that, like with your playing, when you finally saw or felt you coming out in the sound of the music, I mean, what was the blending? What was your individual sound? Like, what was that like? How would, I mean, you said it was blues based. I mean, is it fair to say that it was a complete sort of, like color, like you were awash in blues and classical and jazz? I mean, I just would love you to try, if you can articulate, when you heard that, when you heard you coming out of you. Looking, what does that comprise? What is that comprised of?
Yeah, it was just, well, first of all, it was a weird thing, it's like, wow, that is not, again, that's not George Benson.
Right.
That's not Wes Montgomery. That's this weird thing, and it's like, but when it feels good, you don't stop doing what feels good.
That's the point.
Right.
It feels good. You didn't fight that, yeah.
To your soul, and then you realize that you've got, I've played for really respectful audiences that really, these people, they stand up and they applaud and so forth. So, you're reaching them on some level. There's probably some that are thinking of their favorite record, and will automatically compare you with what's really familiar with them versus you coming out and doing something they haven't heard. But most people appear to know, and I've been able to. I do some compromise measures. I mean, I've done gigs where you're playing with a blues guy, then I will tailor. I will hold off and just sort of pointedly focus on the blues, simplify my playing, take the jazz scales, the full diminished, the whole tone scales, and that out of my mind, and just go back to this ancient energy of the the African the African pentatonic scale, which blues is based on.
Absolutely.
Except then there's a lot of bending and a lot of emotional twisting and turns in there. When with guitar, you have the advantage of being able to to play microtonally when you want, because a lot of blues is played. You never play per se a minor third or a major third. You're playing that note in between so often. Or you're doing a vibrato that vacillates between the note in between and one of the ones above. But whatever it takes to start talking to people, and talking directly to their hearts with that, and they know. It's funny how I think the person that's never had any music training knows those little things. People know when you're talking to them through the very most microtonal, whether pitches and rhythms, and people feel rhythms as well. So, Coltrane moved me that way with rhythm. Obviously it's a combination of all those things. And once you start playing, you don't think of any of those. But I've been in that place where I've played with one of my favorite drummers in town. Guy that's on literally 100, maybe, 300, 400, 500 local records even. And he gets a groove going, and I start playing this way. And I start playing these riffs, and then just sort of flipping rhythms and so forth. And I thought, I remember at the point in which I decided I can go here. And so I started going to this place. And then I go back. I just loved how it went. I got, I put a little clip on SoundCloud, people from all across the world responding to it. Wow, what's that? And I went back and said, well, I need to study my own licks and learn that. And it was too hard. I couldn't do it the first day. Right. What was I doing? How did I do? But it was the spirit that hit me is what did that. I don't technically carry that muscle memory, or those aren't chops and scales that I have like written down. They happened that day, and to learn how to play like that, I had to study what I'd done. So you take those Zen, and I told somebody that, and the person I was talking to just didn't understand at all. But I take my own pre-recorded, you record those Zen moments, and then you study yourself. Oh, that's and you learn how to play that. And then you take those chops, you have another Zen moment, and it translates into something else. And you go back and study that. So I have this technique of self-study. You take your Zen moments, you study them, you learn what you're doing, and then you let those transform. You study that, and you're just growing these chops along these lines of something that comes from another world.
Wow. Dude, John Penny on fire. Right? This is I don't think I've heard anybody articulate it as well as you just did. That is, your father, historically black colleges, certain denominations of the Catholic Church, they frowned on jazz. The blues was the devil's music. Your dad had a band in the church with a guitar. How much did he put the blues and the jazz into the ears of the parishioners?
Well, he it was more, I don't know, because we weren't, we came from middle America.
Oh, yeah.
And so we didn't have that. My dad's an African Methodist, not a Southern Baptist. And so he had this, it was a different sound. He's the one, he brought Basie into the house, and he's that thing about him bringing a trumpet home for me to play at 8 years old versus the violin I asked for had to do with his upbringing in Southern Illinois, where African-American children weren't allowed to get as far as ninth grade when he grew up.
Wow.
So he left he left alone. He hit the highway with a little bag of clothes and so forth, because people told him, you're the type of guy, you're smart, you can make something of yourself. And so he walked, and that's where he wound up in Alton, Illinois, and Alton, Illinois, East St. Louis. And actually, because one of the reasons he brought me the trumpet, his memory of Miles Davis. My dad knew Miles' dad, and my dad actually watched over Miles as a baby.
Are you kidding me?
So, not kidding. So when he came home with that trumpet, that's what he that was on his mind. He said, Miles did that, and so here's a trumpet. It was a cornet at the time,
right.
So I didn't get my violin, but that's what my dad was thinking. And so, because he went there 14 years old, he was what do you call it? He did, he cleaned up the offices of a doctor.
He was like a porter,
doctor, local doctor there, and there's a lady in town that said, that helped him get into high school, and actually later, said, again, they told him you've got potential, and so he goes from this kid walking the highway by himself, winds up at the University of Illinois Law School years later, and that city that actually denied him a ninth grade education. I heard about him later on in life. They actually helped. They paid for his college education. They paid for some of his college education after realizing what the flaws of having the racism that denied him an education as a kid. And they chimed in, and our whole family got some sort of. All of us kids got a like free ride scholarship to this little college that was in that town as well, based on their idea of reparations for having, the racism, not allowing my father to go to school. So anyway, he grew up in that area in Southern Illinois in Alton, and knew the Miles Davis family. And so the other little connection to Miles is that Miles and I were both, I was born in the same town as Miles, Alton, Illinois. And I was also born as a Gemini, as same as Miles. And so, my dad, when he brought that trumpet home, or the cornet home, that's what he was thinking. Just to give you some history and where he was coming from, and not getting.
What a hip dude, man! What a hip cat, man! Oh my God!
But it was it was a little time, and my dad just did various things. He was an editor of the newspaper there at Alton too, and so there are like these historical pictures of him standing out in front of his newspaper and so forth, but I wasn't. It only went as far as my older brother. I wasn't born yet at the time that he was doing that, but he was still, like I said, again, he was thinking of Miles, but having known Miles, because my dad's in the generation in between Miles and Miles' father. He was younger than Miles' father, older than Miles, but that influenced him to want me to take up the trumpet, which, like I said, the guitar took over my spirit by the time I was 15 years old.
Did you, so did he expose he was a jazz head, and deep. And did you guys, like, a lot of the, in the summer times, at least in the, down in the South, there'd be, the sanctified churches, they'd set up these big tents, and you'd have guys playing guitar. It was a total, like it was just like a hootenanny, but not folk music. It was like, blues and gospel, and maybe the Midwest was too tame and conservative for him as a minister to introduce or to really foist blues and jazz onto his parishioners. But do you remember having an experience at just even going and listening to these more sanctified settings? Because, like you said, you were ensconced in blues, Chicago blues, but you also, things would pop up along the way. Do you recall any kind of memories along those lines of just sort of being ensconced in a different kind of spiritual music than choral music, or what was favored in the in certain denominations of the Catholic Church?
What I think, what moved me, and I don't know that. You see, my dad, as an African Methodist, he visited. There was there came to be this. The '60s coming to the '60s was what's called the ecumenical movement, where all these churches were getting together. So my dad was doing a lot of guest speaking, and so we were doing a lot of Midwestern road trips He spoke at a lot of because Iowa had a lot of the Mennonite churches too. So we went as a little kid. I grew up in church basements of Mennonite, Lutheran churches, Catholic church. Because that was what they did at the time, and that sort of, while I was taking in, blues and jazz and flamenco and classical music and folk music and rock and studying all those things, I was also taking in Catholicism, the Southern Baptist, African Methodist, and Judaism. And so actually, there was a period in my life that I actually played a 10-year period where I just played with a Jewish band.
Klezmer music?
Right?
You played?
No, it was like a lot of like just traditional music. There was a guy in the band that brought in this 7,000 song list of things. It's a guy from Spain, and a great horn player and flute player. And he was the driver of all that music, all the different music that this band played. Became a really popular, highly paid band, and the Jewish community. Although we didn't worship with them per se, and played during that time for Hasidic Jews and a lot of Russian Jewish immigrants, and played at every temple. And actually toured with a Jewish historian, just guitar and music box player. We toured as a duo, and he was a historian. So on these driving to these gigs, he was teaching me all kinds of history and so forth. So, but that was always my thing, both spiritually and as a musician, just inundated with all these different ways of doing things. So I wound up, and this was who I was. I found out that's not. At first I thought, well, that exposure made me open to all things, but I think that came from the inside. That was in my DNA to be open to influencing my jazz with flamenco, to influence my jazz with blues, and some of my jazz songs now people say, well, that sounds like Euro jazz because of the amount of Bartok or Ravel influence, and they call it Euro jazz. At the same time, it's have like a funk jazz tone.
Dude, I'm telling you, Penny, you could. The thing about you is that a couple things. I mean, number one, you were open to all experiences, and when you're open to it because of your disposition in life, then it will find you. And then like you can turn on a dime. Like you can be playing some sort of Eurocentric music and then go right into the funkiest McLaughlin, like raging, it's just, and it's totally subconscious at this point. It's great. I mean, it's beautiful. I have another name that voice. I don't expect you to know who it is, but pay attention to the content. And we'll come back.
Sure.
Hearing.
Yeah.
They can't hear. All they can hear is what somebody else hears. They can't hear what they hear because they don't know how to hear. And that's because they learn music by reading. They didn't learn by hearing. This is an oral art form.
Right. It's passed down, right? No notation.
Yeah. You got to be able to hear. Did you ever see John Coltrane and McCoy Tyner on stage reading music? And you never would, because you learn this. You want to go to the play and see the actors reading from the script, or to a movie and they're reading from cue cards. We learn this. If you love this music, you learn this music, and so. Back to your about hearing, they are only, the musicians of today are mostly playing what other people have already heard.
Exactly.
What other musicians, like nobody can play like Dizzy, even if you try. You can't imitate, you can't play like Dizzy because that's his hearing. You have to see what you hear. If you can't see what you hear, then you have to play what somebody else hears. And that's a problem. And they can't do that because there's nowhere to learn how to do that. You can't do it in school. You can teach the concept, But as far as how to do it, you have to do it.
John, that was an interview I did in person in Emeryville with the legendary horn player Gary Bartz, and and he was talking about Miles could hear better. He could hear. He had his own hearing because, like Dizzy, all you guys, and I think you maybe everybody learned from your generation. Learned music by ear before they learned to read it. So your ears were huge. And in today's world, with the academy so with its tentacles so deep into musicians, it's become an assembly line. You learn to read the music. We're saturated with visual material. So cats' ears are locked today. And as a result, you have a homogenization of sound. I mean, I don't care. You go back to the late 60s, Gravatt, LaRocca, Mickey Roker, Tony Williams, Max Roach, the list goes. Every drummer had their own sound. You have your own guitar sound. You learned the music hearing it first before you learned to read it. And I wanted you to talk about, in your own case, about how you learned to sonically hear the whole ensemble and then be able to incorporate your voice into that. Because like he said, musicians today are only playing what they've heard. They're not there's nothing new being created because they can't hear. And I just wanted you to riff on that.
Well, yeah, it's that they can't hear, or that they're just not listening anymore.
Well, that's possible as well. I mean, I think
could they hear? Yeah. Could they hear it if you're taught to listen? That's why I get a guitar student. I get a guitar student, and they say, "Okay, yeah, Mr. Penny, can you teach me to play guitar?" I said, "Yeah. Let's go on a walk."
Right, that's what John Abercrombie. I love it, dude.
Let's go on a walk and let's listen to what you hear. How much music do you hear in the forest? Wow. Some of the greatest grooves I've ever heard came out of the coin dispensary machine on the local bus. You take a bus and you put the money in there.
Totally.
And then it would do I thought, wow, listen to that bus play that groove. So it's a matter of, when I wrote for young students, I wrote a thing called Music Was Here, kind of a little an essay which I kind of taught the class around, where music was here before anything else was, or music was here by the time everything else was. It knows how you feel. It knows everything you're gonna feel already. The music that's there in the forest or by the lake or by the river is there, and it's just waiting for you to hear it. You go out and listen to it, and you learn from it, and you come back and you package that into songs. You study it on your acts, and you learn how to package it there, because the stuff that you're hearing out there is the same stuff that's going to come out of you. But you have to, it's a matter of listening. So I would take a new guitar student on a walk and have them just listen to their surroundings. And then later you can learn to listen to great drummers like Tim Pleasant, Eric Gravatt, and then you're playing with them, and they're, a lot of times those guys drive my sense of melody too. I'll have an improvisation and go with the drummer like that, and I'll go back and listen to why I'm playing the lines I'm playing, and I thought, I just copped it from the drummer. The drummer just played that line. That's why you hear me playing it, and that also helps with continuity, because I think, again, you don't have to be a trained ear to eventually hear all that stuff, hear how the drummer and the guitars and the horns are actually talking to each other at all times because of the listening. And then I think I may be getting off.
Go where you want to go. Go where it goes. Yeah.
But that listening is where the gentleman that was talking, Gary Bartz, when he was talking about that, you pick up the things that you sort of, at first, at least anyway, that sort of are a match for your inner soul. And so you hear that whether you're listening to the sound of the coin changer on the bus, or you're listening to a stream and you start to hear music out there, or literally you're listening to a great pianists like Chick Corea or Herbie Hancock,
Bill Evans, yeah.
McCoy Tyner, and you're hearing their stuff, and that's a little bit more direct. I mean, the more you directly study a McCoy Tyner, the more you're going to have to spend soul searching and become yourself. Have more of those Zen moments where your inner self emerges, or at least the conduit that's flowing through you, the source conduit that flows through you and gets reinterpreted by you, and then it comes out as your sound. But I think I referred to musicians in that Music Was Here essay as archaeologists, like on an archaeology dig. When you walk through the forest, or if you just sit in your practice room, and you're digging for ideas and things that come from places that may not be a musical instrument. But that's your search, listen, acquire. You go on the archaeological dig, and you dig up these artifacts, and you study them, and musically, you've reshaped them, and then they start to come out of you in those different shapes. And as mentioned, you have your Zen moments with that. It starts to mutate and become something else. And again, if that thing, you can start to study that, start to study yourself and say, what is that stuff that's come out of me? I'll study it more closely. Then you get further and further away from center. The more you start creating that new material, studying it, advancing it, developing it, zenning out, studying that, and advancing it. That process is really, I think, important. I'm guessing that might be behind, John Coltrane. I'm sure he listened to his recordings.
Yes.
And at times took, after seeing what he'd done, then he takes it to another level by observing yourself, versus if you were going back and studying McCoy, like what became McCoy's heart, the things that came from McCoy's heart, and you study that, and you stick with that. And like you're saying, if it's a written music, or if you go to the music school and you got these written out solos, and you think that's all there is, then you're going to start to sound like that. But you have to, at some point, just sit there alone, search your soul, and improvise, play freely, let it come out, and you'll eventually and you might look weird at first. Whoa, that's not like what anybody else is doing.
Right, but that's the cool part. Yeah,
let that go. Let yourself go. Just because I think of musicians as it's a constant state of development that never stops.
Right.
Until your last breath, you're putting out stuff that you can evaluate and take to the next level. There's no plateau. There should be no plateau. I think your happiness is based on not letting yourself plateau. Your musical happiness with your musical life depends on just perpetual reinvention.
If me and you walked down the streets of Minneapolis and asked 20 people what their definition of the word jazz is, we'd get 20 different answers. And, you alluded to it before, and maybe you didn't even realize you were doing it, but you talked about Coltrane having a blues-based that's where one of the antecedents was. And the truth is that Sonny Rollins, Earl Palmer, John Coltrane, Charlie Neville, Cannonball, they all walked the bar and honked and walked the bar before they played bebop. So before they got into the intellectual music, they were playing simplistic but raunchy R&B. And I mean, Train didn't like to walk the bar, but the point is the blues was right alongside the jazz. And you can feel that coming through the records, like from that time period. And over this time, here's my question. Can you really codify, what is your concept of jazz? And can you really codify that? To me, it's a street language. And everybody developed, and as we know with street language, everybody has their own lingo or slang. And that's what made the magic of the music. And I I really wonder, outside of private lessons with students, and you can take them in the woods and sort of unlock their ears and get to see the depth of their hearing. What is your concept of jazz, and can you really codify that in the academy? I think there's a direct correlation to the stagnation of vocabulary in jazz music, and the fact that we've moved into this period where, I mean, let's face it, Charlie Mariano, when he went to, when it was the Schillinger House, before it became Berklee School of Music, he was already a professional musician, and the road would maybe be eating him alive, or he'd had some kind of addiction, or he wanted to learn a new instrument, and he could go to the Schillinger House and get off the road. But he was already a professional, and he could spend some time there and develop his craft more, or clean up and go back out and sing for his supper. And now you have kids who are going to the academy, leaving with huge amount of student debt and no guarantee of a gig. And there's like a full codifying of a language that I think, as we've been talking about for the last 70 minutes, is a street language because it came from the blues. And I just wanted you I wanted your opinion on that.
As far as
your concept of jazz, whether you can really put this into a curriculum where you can like kids, like you said, if kids are going in and learning that, or thinking that all they have to do is, there's all this, we're saturated with material. Quite honestly, a lot of visual material and a lot of material that's mediocre. And if they're just comping because there's so much, and that's the requirements of the class, then I'm not sure how you're supposed to find your own individual voice. So my feeling is like, can you codify the language of jazz, and what is your concept of melodic improvisation?
Well, I think, to codify the language of jazz would be just part of the picture. In terms
not
of
the whole thing. Not the whole thing.
If your curriculum, and because part of the curriculum, like as I said, I think I'm hoping this makes sense.
Yeah, go ahead.
When I would have a young guitar student go on a walk instead of practice, say, okay, what scale? You may have heard me on a gig. What scale were you playing? How did you do that scale? What was that chord? Before you learn that, you learn to listen. But if you push curriculum alone, like here's how jazz people have played. We've collected a bunch of material that we've collected a little bit of how, the more modern. We've collected some scales and ideologies that we think that Train used. And then we've got some that maybe John Hammond used, or go all the way back to Satchmo,
mm-hmm.
or all points in between. And you've got some written material from those eras in books, so that you want to let your students know all of and say you do that completely comprehensively, and you capture, theoretically, you could capture all of that from when we first identified jazz as being jazz to this present day. And my question would be, would you even then have the essence of jazz in book form to teach to a student, or would they all still be missing that ideology? The ideology, the things you learn when you go on a walk
mm-hmm.
and think about jazz and think about who you are. How much of it is that, and I don't know whether ideology is the best word, but the sense that it's a development of self, development of being able to look inside yourself. How much of that can be put in textbooks versus the full history of written jazz? And you've got to, if your curriculum includes examples of solos from all phases of jazz history, and so somebody could pick I've got a Dixieland band, and I want to play like Satchmo. That's kind of be the theme that that's what I want to get out of my degree, and I want to, go back to a place in Florida and play this Dixieland band, or I want to go back to Chicago.
Yeah.
And I want to play a Joseph Jarman, a real modern-esque jazz, or I want to play like Herbie Hancock's Cantaloupe Island 8th phase jazz. And so these kids, when they go to school, to me, I think your first day, you're looking at all that stuff, and some of them probably have interest in some of those areas more than others, but they're looking at all that. But are we missing the other one? The part that says, where and how do you go about finding yourself in all that? Is it just going to happen after years of playing, taking a look at Coltrane solos, taking a look at Herbie Hancock's great, magnificent piano solos, or Bill Evans, going back to Bill Evans, or are we missing something with all of that in terms of the concept of jazz being a perpetual personal evolution?
I love it.
That it never stops, that you don't have this thing where you can go learn the solos out of these books and learn to, even if you learn to kind of get your swing down good, you learn to swing really well, you can swing and you can play. Because I knew a kid in the first year of college, kid that just studied every Coltrane solo and got him down. Just like Giant Steps, he played note for note, end to end. And I'm not sure whether he ever understood what Coltrane was doing, though, because the notes aren't the jazz.
Right. That's right.
They're not. It's not there. It's that other piece that I don't know. And it's the piece that I haven't seen in music schools.
No, because that's what Dave Holland said. It. He goes, the older musicians would always say, "You've always got a story. You have to have a story to tell. What's your story?" That's what you're saying. It's and you can't
yourself.
Exactly. I mean that. Before we wrap up set one here with John Penny, who's just been waxing poetic, we've been cooking here for 76 minutes. I remember talking to Steve Gadd, and I was like, "What are you listening to these days?" And he said, "I cannot stop listening to this this album. It's Stan Getz with the Oscar Peterson Trio." And so it was Stan, Oscar, Ray Brown, and Herb Ellis. It was a drummerless quartet, and it was burning, and there was no trap set. And I wanted you to talk about, in your career, when you played, if you played in a group that didn't have a traditional rhythm, a trap set to keep time, so that you really had to develop your own inner time feel so the music could really swing and breathe.
Right. So you're asking what? Excuse me.
Well, like for instance, like Stan, like
that.
if you go back and listen to that album on Verve, it's Stan, Oscar, Herb Ellis, and Ray Brown. No drummer, and it burns. And there's no drummer, because their time feel is so freaking good. And I got to believe that John Penny wound up in a situation sometimes, maybe not a lot, but, the ability of the true creative jazzer, because like Steve Cropper said, they needed to have drums in R&B. You need that backbone. But that album, Stan Getz with the Oscar Peterson Trio, no traditional rhythm set, Ray Brown locking it in. I just wanted you to talk if you have a memory of when you played in a group without a drummer.
Right. Well, one a clear example that comes to mind is the after when the pandemic was starting to settle down, or at least there was this period where people were saying, well, things are getting better, and the clubs weren't quite opening up to having full bands in yet, and so one club owner said, well, let's just. She wanted to just do guitars, and so that's the only type of band. So solo guitars. So I played the like about 15 dates last fall and winter solo, and so in that setting, you become especially aware of the fact that what people hear for rhythm is coming from you. There's no drummer. No bassist, no one to fall back on. You're doing everything, and so the rhythm machine is you. And the thing is that people respond to that too. I mean, people can feel that, and so
God, it's infectious.
You got to know when you're talking to your audience, and you can see it sometimes in their faces when a rhythm a rhythm alone can grab them, and the music can be not much at all. But if the rhythm is something that's cooking, doesn't be cooking in terms of high speed, just slow pulsing with you put a certain message in there. And that's the cool thing about music. You can put messages in there without saying a word. And you might be just playing a C and a G, the C and the fifth above it. So just like a little guitar, that little guitar, percolating guitar thing, and just start that out with an audience. You're looking out there, you're looking at them, you're like, and you say, okay, now I'm getting, and so you say, okay, there's something there, they're liking that, you can see them, they're kind of grooving, and you can, improvisationally, then you can build that, you go to an E suspended chord, and you go to your third chord, and you start, and you put some sort of, classical oriented type chords in there, because I did a lot of improvisational experimentation on that gig to see this is a great opportunity to develop my song, to see firsthand what people like. And if there's no bass player or piano player, you're free to play without a drummer, you're free to play your own rhythms. Without a piano player, you're free to play whatever chords you want. So that this is an opportunity to just jam and see what people like and connect with them on a simple level, and then let it grow, and then do my songs as well. And the other thing I did do on that gig, though, I cheated it a bit. I went home in the home studio and created some drum tracks, bass and background tracks, and I sang some of the my original lyrics, and then brought those recordings to the gig and had it be a band of me singing and playing the drums and bass, and then just add the guitar on stage. And so there you're of course locked into rhythm, but then you're locked into the rhythm because you've got percussion going, but then you're free to do whatever you want inside of that. So that's another another way to approach that. But I've also played in a duo with a keyboard player with just guitar and keys, and we create. The guy is fabulous. My associate in that is fabulous, and so he'll do lots of rhythm. Piano's got all you got 10 fingers, 10 keys, 10 notes at a time. You can do all kinds of fabulous rhythm. So we get a really nice rhythm machine going without a percussion. In fact, with two, a piano and a guitar together can do a whole lot of stuff. If you've got all the rhythmic options, you've got the both can play in the bass register, and both can play all the chords you want and melodic stuff you want. So it's actually there's a fun, liberating kind of thing you can do without a drummer, and as well as I've also done the groups. I've got a group with just guitar and drums, which is another type of thing, which is also a beautiful, beautiful way for a beautiful opportunity for guitars to play with a good drummer that sort of that hears everything you're doing. And I've got some really fun sessions like that with my friend and great drummer Tim Pleasant, and great drummer Ray Rivera as well. And in recording with a great drummer like Eric Gravatt, and once he said he was recording one of my songs for the upcoming album, and he said, "Well, what do you want me to do here?" And I just said, the stuff you do. You just
be you, yeah.
Let Gravatt go, because I'm sure he's played with people that that want him to rein in and do something simplistic or something that. But I try not to pre-hear what people should be doing, because I remember producing a trumpet player and saying, "Hey, can you on this song of mine?" I had a song with the great trumpet player Gene Adams, who's no longer with us. That I produced an album of his, but also he played on my album. And I at one point said, "Well, yeah, try to make this solo, do a little of this and do a little of that." And when I said that, and I listened back to the take where I had left him to do exactly what he wanted to do was the killer take. And so I think that the rule for producers is to get the great musicians in there like Miles did, and then shut up, let them play.
Or you're absolutely. He said I have on tape with Billy Cobham talking about in my interview with him, Miles getting into the head, like basically being a Zen master, bringing the cat in, and then like saying during Bitches Brew, for instance, like to McLaughlin, play the guitar like you don't know how to play the guitar. And he's like, what the heck is he talking about? But he did it, and it sounds amazing. So it's kind of like you bring in the people who you know, you let them be themselves. Sometimes you do have to shake them out of their comfort zone a little bit. At the end of the day, younger cats, because the guitar has become this lead instrument, we've become like that. We've been ensconced in riffology. And a lot of younger cats cannot play rhythm guitar. They can improvise, but you know better than anybody. Every band, James Brown, Kool and the Gang, Basie. I mean, there was always that hypnotic rhythm guitar, and it really adds to the foundation, and it gives the ability for the group to ascend. So I mean, John. Let's put a wrap on set one here, but you're up for doing set two? I mean, I had a ball.
Yes, I definitely am.
All right, great.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the time. It's fun. This is fun.
Well, that's all I care about. At the end of the day, it's not about anything else other than having fun. Happiness is our divine right, and I appreciate you going there with me and just bouncing ideas. And it was a heck of a hang, man. So I'll be in touch. I'll get you a copy of this, and have a beautiful weekend, man.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, and you as well.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Take care.
Later.
Bye.
John Penny, legendary guitar player, and thanks to Tim Pleasant for hooking him up, hoping to get a Solstice reunion together as soon as possible. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you when we see you. Peace.